We're going to begin our discussion on French art of the 18th and 19th centuries. In this lecture, we're going to specifically look at Rococo and Neoclassicism. So the 1700s plays witness to radical changes in society, politics, and philosophy. We see major historical events taking place, such as the American Revolution in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789, and perhaps most importantly, the Industrial Revolution. Now we have three distinct styles that are going to emerge from France during this age: Rococo, Neoclassicism, and Romanticism. France is also going to become the leader of the art world, and it's going to hold that title until the end of World War II, when it shifts to America. So we're moving from Italy, and now we're going into France. And on our map, here we are. So as we talk about French art, we need to talk about art education. And the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture was established by Louis XIV in 1648. This is basically the first time we have an organized program of art education. We had sponsored prizes for students, and we'll talk about those later in this lecture. But more importantly, art was presented in exhibitions beginning in 1737, and these exhibitions were called salons. They adhered to a hierarchical structure of genres that distinguished between different subject matters. I'm going to cover those in just a moment. As you entered the school, a painter could be admitted to the academy at one of various levels. Now, the lowest level, that was a still life painting, and still lifes are collections of inanimate objects. And even if you were a fantastic painter like Chardin was, and this is his work, by painting a still life, that was considered a very menial type of task. If you took an art class today on painting, the very first thing your teacher would do would be to set up a still life and have you paint that. So it's kind of the bottom rung of the ladder. Up from there is portraiture, which is creating a likeness of a person. We also have landscape paintings. Genre scenes. Genre scenes are scenes from everyday life. But the most important, and they're kind of categorized from the other four, we have religion, mythology, and history. And these were the most important paintings of the day. You had to be among the very top art students to be allowed to paint this subject matter. These were also much larger paintings. And when we look at images of the Salon itself, you'll see these paintings standing out from all of the rest because of their size. And they're placed higher on the walls because they would be actually easier to see. The smaller paintings, those are your genre, portrait, still life, and landscape paintings. So let's talk about the Salon. The Salon is an art exhibit, and it's held every year by the Académie des Beaux-Arts, which is what the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture turn into. Here, the very best artwork from the most talented students is put on display for the public to see. The analogy that I normally use is it's like a country sending their athletes to the Olympics. You're only going to send the very, very best. So not all students were allowed to contribute work to the Salon. But the Salon is an extremely popular event that everyone attended. The young, the old, the rich, the poor, the common person to the aristocracy. Everyone went to the Salon. And the location was what is today the Louvre, particularly the Richelieu wing, which you see in this image. And here is an image of the Salon of 1770. And you can see on the walls these taller, larger paintings. Those are going to be your history, your mythological and religious paintings. Then the smaller ones, your portraits, your still lifes, and so on. You'll see that they are crammed literally frame to frame. This is not at all like a museum experience that we would have today where the works are spaced out and you'd have didactic labels next to them. These are literally frame to frame from about the 3-foot mark on up to the top of the ceiling. We have a later Salon of 1787. And the most famous Salon is the Salon of 1863. And we're going to be visiting that Salon and spending some time there after the midterm during our lecture on Edward Manet. So let's talk about Rococo. All right, so Rococo begins in France, as this is the subject of our study for the next week or two. Our time period, Rococo begins in 1715 with the beginning of the reign of King Louis XV. Unfortunately, it does end very abruptly, actually with the beheading of Louis XVI and the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. I like to think of adjectives to help me describe the type of art I'm looking at. And for Rococo, I would use terms such as extravagance and opulence, pleasure, sensuality, sexuality, and leisure. The patronage, the people who are paying for this art to be produced, are the aristocracy. They're paying for it, and it really reflects themselves in the artwork. Content. These paintings rejected the religious and historical themes of the past. Instead, it focused on the carefree life of its patrons, particularly focusing on themes of romance. And finally, when we look at the form of these figures and the artworks, there's a certain softness to them. We have free, floating, billowing, and graceful movements of the figures, delicate coloring, and curvilinear use of line. So here's a nice transition for us. We've just covered the Baroque age, and this is King Louis XIV, done in a very much Baroque style painting. But over on the right, we have a painting that is done in the Rococo style. And so you can definitely see the different form that is being created. The most famous painter of the Rococo is Watteau. And this is a signboard of Gerson, which was Watteau's art dealer. And you can kind of see them packaging up the old Baroque art that was on the wall, and we're now unleashing this new style of Rococo. And then there's a close-up of them putting the old king into the box. This is a Rococo room, just to give you an idea of the style of this time period. And if you ever get a chance to go to the Getty Museum, they actually have a couple of rooms set up in this style that is really fantastic. I mean, when you think about it, this room is alive, and no one is even in it. You have a beautiful chandelier hanging down from the roof. The room is almost completely white. You have silver and gold everywhere. And these beautiful paintings around the very near top of the room. The only thing this room is really missing is Liberace playing a piano. It is that alive and really that beautiful and bright and sunny. So as I mentioned, Watteau is the most famous painter of the Rococo age. However, his works are kind of tough to figure out. They're very ambiguous, or there's a certain vagueness to them. When we try to understand what is going on in this painting, we have a difficult time. It really kind of places us in a position where we're halfway between reality and dream. We've got this really cool sculpture of Venus in the corner. And of course, we have cherubs literally everywhere. They're about as plentiful as mosquitoes. We don't even know whether these people are arriving or if they're leaving. And when they're here, what exactly were they doing? We're not really sure if they were having a picnic or anything like that. but we can denote from their dress, particularly in silks and satins and velvets, this sumptuous clothing is worn by the aristocracy. What we do know, though, with all this mythological element that's present, is this is some type of celebration of love. This is another version of that same painting, also by Watteau, and you'll also see that he's gained some initials after his name between the first and the second renderings of this painting. RA stands for Royal Academy, and this was Watteau's official examination painting for admittance into the Royal Academy. These paintings are really large as well. This is a 4-foot by 6-foot painting. Unfortunately, it's still very confusing whether they're arriving or leaving. We definitely have much less cherubs, and that sculpture of Venus has definitely transformed into a different type of sculpture. But we also have still the aristocracy that is present. Unfortunately for Watteau, he doesn't live very long. He dies at the age of 37, succumbing to tuberculosis. So as I mentioned, the initials RA, after a painter's name, recognizes him as a member of the Royal Academy. We're also going to be shortly talking about the Prix de Rome. So I kind of wanted to get these vocabulary terms out of the way. The Prix de Rome, or the Prize of Rome, is a scholarship given to promising art students, which allows them to study in Rome for about 3 to 5 years. And of course, Rome is still the Mecca for art. We have the ancient Roman ruins, but we also have all that work from the recent Italian Renaissance and Baroque. Unfortunately, Watteau never won this award, but one of our later painters of the style did. And only one of these was given out every year, and some years, none of them were given out. Among Watteau's famous paintings is this one called Giles, and it's also sometimes called Perrault, which is the individual that's standing there. It's a very haunting image when you look at it. Once you see it, you're not likely to forget it. The painting itself was executed in the last year of Watteau's life. One theory is that it was intended to be an advertising sign for an Italian theater troupe. We have a nondescript landscape. We do have a statue of a faun off here at the right. We have a donkey kind of behind this berm, along with about 4 other members of this theater troupe. But even though this is a group of people that are meant to entertain us, we don't have a very entertaining element. They're just kind of present, but also removed at the same time. Overall feelings of sadness, loneliness, and melancholy kind of pervade this image. Another of Watteau's famous works is Venetians, which is really an amazing painting. It kind of reminds me of Las Meninas in a way, because there's an abundance of interesting things to look at. The couple standing is dancing a minuet. Although he looks very much like a sultan, he is a member of the aristocracy. Their stances draw our attention to the people between them, where the cavalier looks like he is somewhat assaulting the girl next to him. There's a couple strolling in the background in front of the fountain. Bagpiper looks like he's not really paying attention too much. He's probably had a little bit too much to drink. He's over here at the right-hand side. Next to him are 2 women and an actor engaged in deep conversation back here. And of course, a nude sculpture up above. So another painting that kind of drips with sensuality and sexual desire. Perhaps my most famous of all the painters we cover in French art is Fragonard. What's really cool is Chardin, who I showed you that still life painting, was one of his teachers. Another French artist, Boucher, was another one of his teachers. And Fragonard actually won the Prix de Rome. So he went to Rome between 1756 and 1761. He was accepted as a member of the Academy, earning the initials RA after his name in 1765. And this is one of the most famous works. It's on our study guide, so make sure you're familiar with it. It's called The Swing. And again, it's essentially explicit work. The original artist who was assigned this work actually refused to complete it. The focal point, of course, being the young girl on the swing, and she's kind of being pushed and pulled by the gentleman way far back at the right in the shadows over here. We barely even see him. Yet the idea is that her lover is laying down here in the bushes as she playfully kicks off her slipper to him. It's a scene of anticipation and desire. We also, of course, have another sculpture off to the left here, and that, of course, is Cupid. But when we look at Fragonard's work, particularly his landscape images, and look at the tree, no one paints a tree like Fragonard does. So let me show you a few of his other works as well. Now, as I mentioned, Watteau ended up dying really young at the age of 37. However, Fragonard lives a pretty long life. He lives until the age of 74. But he's going to die as a forgotten artist. When the French Revolution kicks in, basically this type of art is completely dismissed because it's part of the aristocracy. His works are abandoned. Fragonard himself kicked out of the Louvre. He dies homeless and penniless on the streets of Paris. And it's not going to be until the late 1800s where people start really, once again, looking at his works. So now we're going to move into the age of neoclassical art. So neoclassical art is sometimes referred to, a lot of the times referred to, as neoclassicism. It also originates in France, just like Rococo did. However, it is a response against that movement, which collapses at the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. Anytime you see the term classical in art or in art history, it refers back to the classical age, which is the Greek and Roman empires. Artists sought after these classical ideals as subject matter for their more contemporary paintings. We have a new interest in the past, and particularly of the Greek and Roman ages, because Herculaneum, discovered in 1709, and several decades later in 1748, we get the uncovering of Pompeii. In the textbook, it says that, quote, neoclassical paintings were frequently painted for and displayed in public spaces in order to inspire patriotism, nationalism, and courage in defense of the state. So in other words, these paintings carried messages about patriotism and sacrifice for the greater good. The most famous neoclassical painter is Jacques-Louis David. And this is his most important work, The Oath of the Horatii. This painting is the rallying cry for the French Revolution. It is absolutely done in neoclassical style. When we think about classical art, we think of artwork that is very balanced. This is absolutely a balanced artwork. There are certain ratios involved with this type of art as well. For instance, in terms of Greek art, we look at the human head as one unit of measurement. And so the torso would take up 2 human heads, and then the legs would take up 3 human heads. So everything is done here according to a specific ratio. We also have mathematical elements here. Remember linear perspective? Take a look at that flooring. That is absolutely done in linear perspective with the vanishing point probably somewhere near the very center of the room. And we can even see that with the bricks on either side of the wall. And so this work is absolutely, at least stylistically, neoclassical. Now the story that you see also comes from the classical age. At the end of the Roman Empire, we have the fall of Rome, but before that happens, Rome and the neighboring city of Alba have a property dispute. And neither of them really have the function of going to a full-fledged war against one another. So what they do is they choose two families that both have triplets, the Horatii and the Carati family. Both of them are going out to fight to the death, and whoever wins basically wins the property dispute. So here you have in the center of the room Horace, the father, giving each of these sons a sword. And they are swearing to fight to the death for Rome. Now you can see also their stances are very rectilinear, their arms and their legs and such. And then over here we have all sorts of curvilinear forms with the female figures. Now why are they sad besides that their brothers are going off to fight to their possible death? Well, one of the women back here with the two children, she's married to one of the Carati family. This woman here is betrothed to another one of the Carati brothers. So there's a big soap opera effect that's going on in this painting. It's got a great narrative. And what ends up happening is that only one of these brothers comes back. The Horatii win the war, win the battle. However, only one of the brothers survives. And of course, the women are incredibly sad because they know that they've lost their fiance and their husband, the father of these children, and they've also lost two of their own brothers. So when the last remaining brother comes back home and he sees his sister crying, do you think he puts his arm around her and says, "Hey, I had to do it for the city"? He actually kills her, saying that, quote, "No one should mourn an enemy of the state." So once again, this is about patriotism and sacrifice for the greater good. Now this is David here, and he is the most popular painter of his age. Today we think of movie stars as being incredibly famous. This was the Brad Pitt of his age, and David could not even walk the streets of Paris without being mobbed by individuals. He was one of the winners of the Prix de Rome in 1774. He had tried several times to win the award, and he finally did. During the French Revolution, he was imprisoned twice and becomes the court painter to Napoleon in 1795. Not only was he the court painter, but Napoleon and David were very close friends. In fact, when Napoleon falls from power in 1814, David goes into exile in Belgium. Another of his famous works is The Death of Marat, and this is probably his second most powerful painting. This takes place on July 13th, 1793. Marat was a physician, he was a scientist, he was a radical journalist, and he would write pamphlets urging for the abolition of aristocratic privilege. He suffered from a painful skin ailment called prurigo, and he commonly wrote in a medicinal bath. He actually got this skin disease by hiding in the sewers beneath Paris, hiding from his enemies. However, Charlotte Corday, who was a supporter of the aristocracy, gained admittance to his home under false pretense, and when she is alone with him, she stabs him. She is caught, and she is herself executed at the guillotine 4 days after this event. Marat himself is a martyr. He dies for the people. You can see that his arm has fallen, the pen beginning to slip out of his hand. The other hand clutching the note that actually gave Corday admittance, and I'll show you a close-up of that in just a moment. On the floor we have the murder weapon, but this knife in reality sticks in his chest. The packing case next to his bath is real similar to a tombstone. We have this term that's actually more commonly used in contemporary art called recontextualization, which means that we're taking an object and it transforms into something else. So this box here at the right, this becomes kind of like a tombstone, and this medicinal bath becomes somewhat of a coffin. Marat and David were also friends, and David had just paid this guy a visit literally the day before he was assassinated. In fact, David says, quote, "I found him in a situation that astonished me. Beside him, a wooden packing case, on it an inkwell and paper, and from his bath, he was noting his last thoughts for the welfare of the people." And so, once again, we have this theatrical element that is present here. It's very similar to what we see during the later High Renaissance. Marat almost looks like the dead body of Christ. And here's the detail of that painting, literally stating that Corday would like to meet with Marat. And here's a painting by a different artist, and here a little bit more lifelike. We still have the medicinal bath and the wooden case next to it, but we've got the knife sticking out of his chest. And this is how famous it is, because we love to make parodies from it. One last neoclassical work we'll see is The Death of Socrates. And once again, this is a classical story that comes from around 399 BC. And it's during the Greek civilization where Socrates is convicted of corrupting the youth of Athens, and he's sentenced to death. He decides to become his own executioner by drinking hemlock. So again, a very classical, very well-balanced image. We've got the linear perspective and the flooring. We've got the figures made according to specific ratios. So Jacques-Louis David not only created neoclassical paintings, he was also involved in what are called romantic paintings. And in our next video, we're going to be speaking about Romanticism.